Hey everybody! Welcome to another episode of Unhinged with Terry Kavanagh. I'm his co-host, Carl Choi. What's up, Terry? How's your morning?
Good so far, recovering from last night, but
What happened last night?
it's some music and maybe some alcohol and some more music and alcohol. I hit a couple of bars. I'm in New Orleans, so I hit a couple of
Uh,
bars and saw four different bands.
I'm so jealous. I worked in the music industry for 15 years and then left it, kind of disconnected from music for 5 years, and I had my bachelor party at New Orleans, and
Oh,
then
you mentioned that.
fell back in love with music. So I always have like a really special place in my heart for it. But yeah, today's a very special episode. I think. But first of all, let's introduce our other co-host, Mr. Swagglehouse himself. What's up, Mickey?
Hey, Mickey.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show today. It's great to be in good company with Carl and Terry, and yeah, looking forward to having an unhinged conversation.
Yes, and
I didn't drink last night though, so I might not be as
Well, you can
unhinged.
drink now.
That's true. That would be appropriate for the show.
we talked about that, right, Terry? Adding
Yeah,
adding like daytime alcoholic consumption to the show. I think once we get
sure.
the hang of it, we'll have to like have folks even come back who missed out on
Yep.
that. But today's a very special guest. I mean, Terry, would you like to share a little bit about history about our guest today?
Yes, today's guest is Ann Nocenti. She was my first official boss
Yeah.
at Marvel when I became an official assistant editor. I had a little bit of a practice run before that. Ann was the editor of the X-Men at the time, so I was diving in head first to some of the most scrutinized books out there and handled them all with her usual aplomb. She also was a noted writer on Daredevil and wrote some stories for me in Marvel Comics Presents. I was very proud to be able to
Right.
do that.
And you know what? For me personally, really, really close to my heart was her co-creation of Long Shot. And so, without further ado, let's welcome Anne Nocenti. Welcome,
Hi.
welcome. And Anne,
Hello.
welcome to Unhinged.
Unhinged. I'll
And,
try to be unhinged.
yes, we're here. And to the audience, what the heck is this, right? So these days, I mean, you guys know, like you've seen creators being upset with Marvel publicly. You've seen folks talk about the relationship with their publishers publicly. We've heard about breakups within creator teams and whatnot. So for us, we just want to kind of dive a little deeper into the past, like in the times of when Terry worked with a lot of amazing individuals like Anne. You guys were in the golden age. So what was that like? And so we want to just kind of come back together, recall certain stories. I mean, you guys touch a little bit upon a certain personalities in our green room, and then Mickey, feel free to chime in too. If you have any thoughts or ideas or questions. But first of all, Anne, would you mind just introducing yourself to our audience today about who you are, what you're up to today, just for them to get to know you a little bit?
Ann Nocenti. I've written like thousands of comics, and since it goes back over, I think like what, Terry, 35, 40 years?
40.
And, you know, basically when people interview me about a particular, comic, I have to dig it out and read it because I forgot it, of course. But yeah, I make films. I was a journalist for a long time. I was a film teacher. I've done all kinds of stuff, but that's a conversation for you can have alone with Wikipedia, you know. But in terms of Marvel in the 80s, it's funny because I've been thinking about it lately. And my buddy Dean Haspiel, who is a wonderful comic book artist, and actually he might even be joining the chat I said join the chat if there is one to heckle me and
There
Terry.
is, please,
So
yeah.
he's doing this book that's like only in New York or something. They're short stories about things that can only happen in New York. And so I was writing a bunch of ideas, like the first time I got mugged, this or that. And I ended up doing a story about getting a job at Marvel. And because I was thinking about it. I was like, there are so many great stories about the 80s bullpen. What we really should do is an 80s Marvel bullpen comic where we like open with Mark Grunwald wrapped in cellophane.
Perfect.
I mean, one of the things about the Marvel bullpen in the 80s is that, there were people that constantly created shenanigans, and I wasn't in the like inner circle that launched the shenanigans, but I was a willing player. So when it was mostly Mark Grunwald and Mike Carlin, right?
Yep.
There was anyone else in the inner crew, Jack Morelli.
Yeah, of course.
They would launch something on us like, let's have a whack off. And so I know what you're all thinking a whack off is. It's literally doing something with your hand. And it's so they got all these what is paddles, the paddles with the balls. Did they have a name?
I don't remember.
This all sounds so dirty, right? Paddles with the ball, whack off.
I thought exactly that's where it was going. I want to double click on shenanigans, and you went in on it.
The kids don't know what that toy you're talking about.
Mark and people painted our faces on the paddles, so it turned out a whack off was bouncing a ball against your own face. Yeah. And I should have gone into my box of junk because I still have my paddle. I could have done it. Wow. Oh, there's a paddle.
Yep,
there's a paddle. Well, it's funny. You search paddle, you get pickleball. That's kind of a hot thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this was these are $500. Like, what's going on? They're like collectibles.
Oh yeah, because I play table tennis, and the prices of paddles have gone so high.
Wow.
And they're also multi-use paddles. So anyway, so one day, like, Mark showed up naked, wrapped in saran wrap, and one day they filled the room with posters of Michelle Marsh, right?
It was even better than that. We were all instructed. Michelle Marsh was a newscaster in New York at the time, and they had ads on the subway with her face, and we were all instructed to steal those ads.
Yeah.
And then cut out her face and then attach them to sticks and sort of or rubber bands and wear them as masks for like one of the Marvel tour Fridays.
Yeah.
So all these kids are coming through and just seeing a lot of Michelle Marshes.
A lot of Michelle Marsh. And the origin of that, I guess, for some people was just that her face was all over New York. Yes. But there was also something weird. She was one of the first, like the early female news front, but she was very like kind of sexy and petulant. Yep. And a lot of people were like, ooh, Michelle Marsh, So it was partly that, but I think that, to capture the shenanigans, because it was real. It's not just a legend in our minds, right, Terry?
Yep.
And everybody has little pieces of it they remember. Like at the I went to the Thunderbolts. Marvel has these friends and family screenings, and I went to the Marvel Friends and Family Thunderbolts screening last night, and there were a lot of old timers there. And we were talking about the time that Mark remember when he moved somebody's office into the bathroom, and somewhere.
Oh my gosh.
Whose office was
That's
that?
awesome. What a fun office culture.
Yeah, it might have been Sid Jacobson's office.
And it was weird because no, they actually went into the bathroom stalls.
I know, but it might have been Sid's office that got moved in there.
Oh. So all I know is somewhere I have a photo of Bob Harris sitting on a toilet as if he was working on a Marvel comic.
Yes.
And
remember when Mark, in an attempt, because Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, was very tall, and he would come in and look over the stuff on your desk. So Mark built that giant platform and put the desks, his and Howard Mackey's desks, on top of it. So when Jim came in, he couldn't look down at the desk.
Look down and see what you're doing.
Yeah, and it was hollow underneath. So when they saw somebody coming, they didn't get freelance or whatever. They just hid under this platform, and people.
Oh
would come
my
and go,
gosh.
"Where's Walter Howard?" And everybody's like, we don't know.
You
Who
know,
knows?
one funny thing is that in terms of people going into your office and trying to like suss out what you're up to by it. So I first started as Jim's secretary, and I did paste up mechanicals, I did coloring, I did some writing, but my official job was Jim's secretary. And to give you a sense of the times, you could smoke in the offices back then.
I did. I was a
What a party, dude! It's so different. Even everything you guys say right now, I'm like, I want to be in the office, like just the way you're talking, and I'm like, dude, I feel like I'm FOMOing right now for the office.
Yeah, I have FOMO about my own self sometimes.
Yeah.
So what do you call it? So you could drink in the office, smoke in the office, and there were guns in the office because for reference, we needed lots of guns, and so I was typing up. I was Jim's secretary, and I had gotten some advice at some point in my life. If you don't really want a job, don't be good at it. So I was determined to be a terrible secretary. And when I see Jim at Comic-Cons, he's always like, "You are a terrible secretary." And I go, I know. Yeah, I was terrible at it because he promoted me really fast to assistant editor because I was a terrible secretary.
That's brilliant.
When Mike Hobson came on, remember when Mike Hobson became whatever he was, the publisher, really nice guy. I loved Mike Hobson. And Jim wrote up, he had these big yellow pads, and he wrote up the gist of the most important players, like the most important writers, artists, editors. And I had to type it up. And I was typing it up at my desk, and Chris Claremont comes in, and he's like hanging around my desk for a little too long. And I'm like, wasn't his editor yet. And I was like, what's up with this guy? Why is he like hanging right at my desk? He slams into Jim's office. They're screaming in there. Then Chris storms out, and then Jim storms out, and he's like, how could you do that? And I said, do what? And he goes, you were typing the memo, and Chris was reading it upside down. Typewriters then, the paper would flop over. Chris was not. He was lurking because he was reading upside down. And it was the section that described Chris Claremont.
Oh, God.
What did it say?
Well, it said a lot of flattering things and how great he was and how, I still have that memo. Like,
wow.
I have it someplace. And then it said, maybe he sometimes swipes ideas from sci-fi novels. And that's the part that Chris went,
That's hilarious.
We all got inspired by other mediums. I mean, that's storytelling.
Yeah, it's storytelling. And it's also like there's the history of art is all about people riffing on each other. I mean, there would be no Picasso if there were no like ancient wall paintings, so and the whole history of music is people sampling each other.
All sampling, yeah.
And the art world, it's all like at the time there were some old timers on staff like Jack Abel who would sort of laugh but not laugh about how Roy Lichtenstein had blown up one of his comic panels and sold it for millions. And it was, is that sampling or is that, ripping someone off? So
that's ripping someone off.
Yeah, that's ripping. I mean, he should have at least said original work by Jack Abel, and here's some chump change. But comics back then, again, to give you context, they were not respected, and they were considered like junk, like or public domain, like Andy Warhol and the Campbell soup can. They were fair game to just sort of do whatever you wanted because the IP was kind of fairly worthless back then.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like what was really cool, and I think I would love to hear Mickey's thoughts on this, is I remember reading the books, and it just felt like you guys were having so much fun creating them. I feel like mediums always is about capturing the energy in the room, and you could feel like the blast you guys were having. Like some of the, it's just, where do you guys come up with this stuff, right? And now it makes sense.
I know you guys are
smoking, drinking.
And honestly,
well,
Carl,
I'm sure you guys will riff on this, but
sorry, go ahead, Mickey.
I was just saying, it sounds like, there was so much community and camaraderie in this building, and you guys like working in each other. And even if you're not working on the same projects, there's a relationship there versus like, Anne, I know you've written, like I think Storm like a year ago. I'm sure like, I don't know where you write, but I assume, maybe you just did it at your house or in a coffee shop or, wherever you write. And it's like, that seems like that maybe that's missing in this connective universe that existed with you guys in Marvel in the 80s versus today.
There was, also I think that the further people are apart, that's when communication can go wrong. So there are a lot of little dilemmas that happen in comics now. I think it's because everybody's so far flung and they can't just talk to each other. Like, the bullpen, and nobody wants to go back to the bullpen because everybody likes working at home. But, you'd have, and also back then, artists that lived close would bring their pages in. So you had like Walt Simonson and Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz and all these amazing artists like showing off their new pages, and everybody's talking about the pages. And then you had a lot of the on-staff editors were also artists. So you had Al Milgram and Carl Potts, and you had John Romita right on staff. So also people were talking about storytelling, like, going over layouts and talking about how, well, this panel doesn't have enough lift to it. The point of it is lift. Let's not cut off the feet of the person if you want them to have a sense of lift. And, things like maybe horizontal panels to show a fall or horizontal to go to show, so there was a lot of like, and cameras, filmmaking comes into it because, you always want to put your camera at the feet of Thanos or Galactus so that you get that, oh my God, they have gravitas. And so the conversations that were going on were teaching us, everyone was learning how to tell stories. And you had all these backups, especially, Milgram, Potts, and John Romita, they all knew what they were doing. Larry Hama, would go over layouts, and like you were a newcomer and you learned so much just by coming into the office. There was nothing formal. It was just like if you were sitting there with a page, people would look at it and help you.
We were all apprenticing with each other. Yeah. And it's honestly the only office culture I've ever experienced that I miss. Usually an office culture is sort of boring and I'd rather be working from home. But we were what was known as exempt employees. So theoretically, we didn't have to work 40 hours a week. If we could get our comics out in 5 hours a week and meet the shipping deadlines, that was fine. If it took 60 hours, there was no overtime. But honestly, people stayed at that office more than they had to. Even if they were done with their work, they'd wander into someone else's office. They'd wander into Ralph's office and chat with him for a while. And then no one wanted to be, everyone wanted to be the last to leave Ralph's office, because as soon as you left Ralph Macchio's office, he started doing insulting impressions of you.
Oh, yeah. So like, anytime you visited, but one of the things that like people like Steve Ditko used to come into the office because he felt comfortable there. Yeah. And he felt comfortable, especially in Ralph's office for some reason.
Yes.
And then, that's how I got to do a Daredevil with Steve Ditko, was because Steve came in. Steve didn't need work. He didn't, but he had to work. So if he didn't have work that he had to do, he kind of, was hungry for something to draw. So, Ralph would just say, well, you and Annie do a Daredevil. And then I go, well, Steve, what do you want to draw? And he came up with this idea. He was like, well, I was thinking about how a terrorist could have a bomb in a bag and be walking around New York City, and you wouldn't even know. Is it a bomb in the bag? Is it a baby in a bag? And I ended up doing a story based on that. And it was like sort of prescient, the whole dirty bomb thing didn't come till later. But that was Steve,
I completely agree too with Dean Haspiel, what he's saying. I'm sure the bullpen synergy is undeniable. I mean, look how many great comics came out of the bullpen. Like one you're talking about exactly. And I remember Steve Jobs, when he designed the Pixar offices, he designed it in a way where for everyone to have to get lunch, everyone has to cross paths. Yeah. And so he believes that these kind of unexpected synergies is what makes a creativity thrive. And it sounds like you guys were in the mix of it.
Well, we all had a passion for what we were doing. Most of us were comic book fans growing up. And we were so happy to be doing what we did. I can honestly tell you, I was aware comic books had such an impact on me growing up. I was aware every day of how privileged I was if I was able to bring that to one or two kids out there, that was lucky for me. And we would have expense accounts and we would go out to lunch and argue very passionately about whether Captain America would hit Spider-Man from behind, even if Captain America was possessed by Mephisto. We would argue, and then eventually the waiters and waitresses would stop coming to our table because it seemed weird to them that we were arguing about this.
The lunches were so legendary that I noticed somebody posted on Facebook or something that the Abbey Tavern is finally gone.
Yeah.
The Abbey Tavern was like where we would do our story. I think it was Larry Hama or somebody posted that it's gone.
He did.
Yeah. But and speaking of Captain America, it's interesting that the back then you didn't have the internet, so people couldn't troll you to death. Like people now, they literally troll people into wanting to kill themselves, but I wrote a Captain America story, and because I didn't grow up reading comics, I was like, and Ralph, I don't remember how I put Cap in Daredevil. Usually it was something editors did where it was like, and when you were the editor of the X-Men, people would come in and say, my book's sales are sinking. Could I borrow an X-Man? And I was usually like, what's the story? Does it fit that you need this X-Man? And then if it fit, sure. And so I don't remember why I had Cap, but I was looking at Cap and I'm like, well, who is Captain America? What would he do if the country did something that he didn't like? So my story was about some war we were in the 80s that we had no business being in. I forget which war that would be. And
a lot of choices.
A lot of them, yeah.
Maybe both wars.
And Cap sees these. He goes up to a newsstand and he gets so furious about the fact that America's in this war. He talks about how I don't represent that America. I don't want to be the face of that America. And I got these letters came in. Get the commie off the book. Wow. It was like. Wow, Captain America, if he doesn't support everything America does, that means he's a communist, and also the words were coming out of Cap's mouth, not mine. I'm writing a story, and they were like, she's a commie, it was like,
oh man.
Those were the days when the idea was we had to invade countries to fight communism. Yeah, that was
the more things change, the more things stay the same. Sorry, Swag, go for it.
Oh no, I was just saying. So you were ahead of the cultural times. I mean, I feel like that's probably the world that entertainment lives in today.
Oh, it's just me that got frozen.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. What?
He was saying you were ahead of the cultural times.
We're it's maybe our internet.
Yeah,
no, I agree with you. I was thinking the same thing. Oh, there you are.
I guess it's my internet that's having trouble.
Okay, but it's weird. You came back extra clear for some reason. I don't know what you did, but yeah.
She's freezing again.
Freezing a little bit.
It's a glitch in the matrix.
Just keep talking.
Yeah, you can chime back in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can
Mickey.
log out and log back in. I think it'll probably refresh.
Am I back?
You are.
Yeah, you're.
Oh,
Yeah, I think Mickey. I don't know if you were
If
thinking
it
this
keeps
too.
happening, log out and log back in, and it should refresh.
but I'm here now, right?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, Mickey. I don't know if you were thinking this too. Kind of in speaking of like the modern day meta, I loved how Anne kind of took a pause before she would commit to letting a crossover happen. And the question was,
Totally.
how does this character fit in the story? I don't think they do that anymore.
Yeah,
Instead,
I was
it'll be
gonna say,
like, yeah, like the corporate guy in the suit be like, we got the Godzilla IP. Who can we put Godzilla with? Oh yeah, I could just imagine like 23-year-olds. Yeah, we could put like Fantastic Four, doing magical experiments on Godzilla, or Captain America. He's fighting for America. He's gonna invade Japan and fight Godzilla. Like I could totally imagine just the worst ideas being pitched, and the corporate suit guy going, great idea. We're gonna sell $1 million of comics. It's just
It's always going to go badly when you try to take a character and make them fit into a story as opposed to creating a story around that character.
You know
And
who
who that
did a
character is.
crossover really well was when I was writing Catwoman, Scott Snyder. He sent a memo to everybody in the Bat family, and just basically said, "Here's the premise. The Joker is going to torture everyone Batman cares about, and the subtext is that he's kind of jealous and he's in love with Batman. That's kind of the subtext. Do whatever you want." And because it was during the New 52, when they were rebooting the books, Catwoman had never met Joker. So I had to do the story and Scott just gave you this little thing, and then it was like, play if you want, or don't play. But I thought that was really a smart way to do it, because you could still tell whatever story you wanted. And if you wanted to play, that was the parameter. And so it was Catwoman is, so I did 2 issues where Catwoman is being tortured by this guy, the Joker, but she doesn't know that he's doing it because he's in love with Batman and jealous of, I think that was what it was. And it kind of was a really great way to do a multi-book crossover. And the way Scott presented it, you were like, yeah, I want to play in that. It wasn't like commanding you to do anything, or so
and
I
also
think
it didn't require you to take your character and send them to Mars for an issue or 2, because there was a giant supervillain war going on Mars, and then that would really interrupt the momentum of whatever you were writing in the book at the time. He gave you a little springboard and said, see if this works for you. That's perfect.
Yeah, and it was really fun. I mean, it made the whole thing fun. It's sort of like the first crossovers, which I think were done by Louise Simonson. It was when I was maybe Wheezy's assistant, and she came up with, or her and Chris came up with the Mutant Massacre, and then someone else. And then, like the one where everyone went to hell. Inferno crossover, people just went up and down the offices and said, Marvel's going to hell. You want to take your characters to hell, go to hell. And, and most of us were like, yeah, you too, go to hell. Then, and so I had Daredevil get on a New York City subway, which is a form of hell, and go right down to hell, and so you have to make a crossover fun and enticing so that all the writers of the book want to play in that playground. There was another point when I was writing Catwoman where it was some Jeff Johns directive that something be happening in my book. I still don't even know what it was. And then they just, he came in and rewrote a couple panels to make my book fit. And I was like, what? This is how not to do it. I
firmly believe in any artistic medium in music, whatever. If the creators, if the artists are having fun, that's when the audience is going to have fun.
Yeah.
If the artists are begrudgingly doing their work, the writers, whatever, it's going to show on the page. It absolutely will.
Yeah.
All right, you want to spark something else, Terry?
Well,
I got something from the audience, from Stan. As a writer, did you guys feel compelled to, and this is probably for both of you guys, feel compelled to write for fans, or did you feel free to write as you viewed the world? Thanks.
Speaking for myself, I wrote for me. Again, to what I just said, if I didn't enjoy it, nobody else was gonna. And I wrote for me, and also comic books, one of the great advantages is it's a very collaborative medium. Yeah. So you could speak to your artist and say, what do you feel like drawing these days? And if they're like, oh, I'd love to go to Atlantis. If it worked for your character, like I wrote Spider-Man for a while, that wasn't really organic to get Spider-Man down to Atlantis. You could do it. There's ways. It's comic books. You can do anything really. But I always wanted to talk to my artists and say, what do you think would be something that would inspire you, that would bring your best work to the page? And I could write to that.
That makes so much sense, because as a publisher perspective, I've literally had artists I've been working with for the last 5 years that says, Carl, this is so refreshing. I get to talk to my writer.
Yeah.
Because in the last 20 years, they haven't spoken to their writer. And to me, I'm like, mind blown. Like, how can the cinematographer and director never talk to the screenplay writer? Or, it doesn't make any sense to me, right?
It's true, and it's only happened to me like a couple times when, and I get really confused. It's like, why is the editor keeping the writer and artist apart? And I will just email over and over, can I have the artist contact, please? Until they do it, because if you don't have contact with your artist, the comic can go really wrong. Because the artist is thinking, how am I going to draw this? I don't want to draw this. And in the old days, they just call you on the phone and you talk it through. And so when it happens, it goes really, it doesn't. So I won't really work on a comic if the artist isn't right there in the conversation.
Yeah.
And honestly, even I worked for Zenescope, editing and writing for a few years back. And I, as an editor, would call some of the artists or the writers to talk to them, and they'd be stunned. They assumed I was calling to fire them because they'd never heard a human voice from the publishers, from the company before. They'd be stunned. They're like, what did I do? What did I do? I'm like, I just want to talk to you and say how much I liked your approach to this scene. And I might have some things I also wanted to redirect them on, but they just had never heard from anyone in the business over the phone before.
And what I try to do now is I put a note at the top of all my scripts that say, dear artist, you're the storyteller, break this down however you want. And I try to write always under 6 panels, of course, and then tell the artist, you can combine panels, you can add panels, do whatever you want. I write full scripts, and then I rewrite when I see the art. I've never understood why the phase of rewriting when you see the art is one of the most important parts, because that's when you really can make each panel work. Word and picture works beautifully. And it's like, I actually learned a lot working with David Aja on The Seeds, this book here, because he's a master at the linguistic unit of word and picture being perfect. So, I learned a lot working with him just on how he took my script and he made sure that it fit perfectly. Each line of dialogue was its own. And then what's fun is after you finish a comic, if you have lots of panels that stand alone as like a synergy of word and picture, you've done your job. If you can't find a panel that stands alone, you've kind of failed. Like if there's too much blah, blah, or, so So, and we're into your first question. I write for myself because I usually write from something I'm angry at, like when I did a recent 6-issue Captain Marvel story. You have to respect the fans. There's this thing called the Carol Corps and they love their girl. But at the same time, this was, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I was literally worried about the lack of chips. Like there are these $1 billion things now where it's like a reverse magnifier in order to etch the chips. Most of these factories are in Taiwan. And, I was like, what if somebody just like blew up a chip factory and threw the whole, the whole system off? So that was the villain. The villain was a Luddite who hated tech and wanted to blow up. So that was what I was afraid of back then, was how much we were relying on AI and on, I had a AI GPT chat robot in it. And so I write from fear, from what I'm afraid of, put it out in the world. And I had this character, and then, they were like, come up with a villain for the story. And I kept saying, what about this villain? What about that villain? And Marvel was like, they're busy. And then I literally did something I do sometimes, which is I typed into Google forgotten villains,
Wow.
Forgotten Marvel villains. And who popped up? Nitro. And I thought, old guy, kind of looks like a deadhead. His power is to blow up. What makes old people blow up these days? Waiting for something on your phone. So I had him trying to talk to a doctor because he had headaches, and he was put on hold by an AI, and then he blew up, and I was like, this fits perfectly into my and then, of course, I find
There's
out
Nitro here, right here, Robert Hunter, aka.
I think he was designed by Jim Starlin.
Okay.
Yes, I think he was
This
created.
looks very Jim Starlin-ish, yeah.
And so I thought he's cool looking, and then I worked with the absolutely brilliant Paolo Villanelli, who redesigned him, and it was like he did the best redesign. He's probably there he is.
Okay.
I mean, it's a wonderful redesign of a character.
Yeah.
So you write for yourself, but you also write for respect the fans, and then respect the point of the book. Captain Marvel goes into space, so you have to have a space odyssey. Oh, there he is, blowing up.
Yep, there he is.
And that's interesting what you said, that you write full script now and then do rewrites later. I mean, the way we were trained way back when was the Marvel style of plots, and we didn't really put dialogue in. And I actually, when I would write plots, tried as much as possible to avoid putting any dialogue in.
Oh, you're kidding. Yeah, I used to do the opposite. I put all the dialogue in the plot.
That's interesting. So for me, I wanted the dialogue to come from the art. Really, how the art portrayed it. There were exceptions. There were times I knew that I want to write to this scene, and this is what I want to say in that scene. That's obviously different. But for me, I felt like I'd be constraining the artist a little if I put dialogue.
I think artists like plots as opposed to full scripts. But so I would write Marvel style, write a plot, but I put a lot of dialogue in just so you'd know what the expression on the face would be.
That makes sense.
Battle with, scene with Daredevil and Bullet, let's have, this is Bullet is, had just, you have to put some dialogue in.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
It sounds like it worked too, because Anne, you're willing to, after the fact, rewrite.
Oh,
you have like a strong vision loosely held. That's kind of like that
process. Right to put it that way, because it has to be a collaboration. It has to, and because I worked in film. I wrote screenplays for years and had a film made, and it's sort of once the director takes over, you have to sort of step aside. They notoriously basically block the writer for having anything to do with it once it's got a director involved. And so you have to stay flexible.
See, I don't understand that either. I feel like, personally, as a filmmaker, I feel like some of the best IPs that's traveled in mainstream is because the creator came along for the ride. And I think a lot of times, like, the director misinterprets IP, and that's why we have the Sony movies, right? It's like they disconnect completely from Marvel and they do their own thing, and like they're scratching their heads as to why it doesn't resonate with the core audience. It's because the director wants to put their own mark on it, and often they don't select directors that are even fans of the IP, and so and it's taken such a far off direction, and you wonder why it doesn't work. So yeah, I'm a big fan of collaboration and building the right team.
If you put, if you took a Marvel IP and had Michael Bay direct it, you'd have a lot of explosions. There'd be a lot of action, but it would probably lack any. Really, the strength of Marvel characters is the men and women under the masks. It's not the superhero identity. It's the civilian identity. It's how would Peter Parker solve a problem, not how would Spider-Man solve a problem. And if you get the wrong director who just thinks, wow, there's a lot of great villains here and I can do a lot of explosions and action, you're going to really miss what makes Spider-Man or Marvel characters popular.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to do a pivot. Oh, go for it.
Sure.
Oh no, it's just your model, which I think is the best model. I think only works assuming that all of the creatives are aligned, and they share that same vision. So it's like, but if they don't, then yeah, of course the director doesn't want to talk to the screenwriter or the original creator of the IP, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think as a producer, my job is to align all those visions. And if it doesn't really work, then the foundation wasn't built in the right place in the first place. So I'm gonna pivot the conversation. And Mickey, I want you to kick it off first because California Comics, he's a new store. Welcome. Thank you for your service. What do you like most about visiting a comic book shop? That question is for all of you. I want Mickey to start with this first because I feel like I'm a guess that there was a very different relationship between the publisher and the comic book shop in the golden era. I'll just say when in the 80s, 90s, I feel like there was a different kind of synergy. Mickey, could you help describe what you think the relationship is now, if any?
Well, I think the answer to my question in one word is just the community that you feel when you go into the shop. I mean, I think this is probably very true of a lot of people who are into comics. It's like I have so many friends in my real life that know nothing about all the stuff behind me, know nothing about these stories, and it's very rare to like meet people that you can nerd out on, like, oh, blah blah blah, this Anne's work on Daredevil, da da da, and there's so few people that you can talk about that with in your regular life, but when you go to the comic book store, like all of a sudden you're within that community that you can have that shared conversation and shared experience. And so it's just it's to me it's still the lightning rod for where all of the fandom and culture happens. And even if people still buy comic books online, or they read digital, or they're on StreamYard talking comics together, like I still view the shop as the place to gather. It's like the town center in a way. So that's my favorite part about going into the store. It's just feeling the energy. And to what you guys were saying, earlier, working in a building where you feel that camaraderie and that energy, I think is something that is hard to create, in the digital world that we live in. So still good to go to a store every now and again.
Yeah, to what you just said, when I was growing up, I grew up in New York. I grew up in Queens. Most of my friends didn't care about comic books. There were no comic book stores then. The only way I would ever sort of experience that community was the occasional convention that my dad might take me to. Then when I started going to high school in Manhattan, Super Snipe Comics, which is one of the first comic book stores in Manhattan, was about 3 blocks away. And the first time I walked in there, it was like a portal to another dimension for me. It really was. It was, in my mind, it was glowing. There were little winged creatures flying around. I don't really think that's how it was, and it was, comics came out on Tuesdays in those days, and you'd go there and it was a tiny shop. So there'd be a line outside. So even before you got into the comic book store, you're chatting with people. Yeah, that was it. You're chatting with people about comic books, which was not anything I really did until high school and until that location. And I would run in to friends from high school or people I knew in high school. I would run into them at the comic book store, and that's when we would both discover we're both comic book fans. And then we could talk more about it at school or become friends from there. It was my happy place growing up. My happy place now is Walmart, but that's a whole other story.
They're selling comic art. Look at this. Fine comic art originals, adventure fantasy illustration, comic art gallery. Well, they were ahead of their times.
It was a tiny, tiny store.
Wow. They're really ahead of their time. They're like a whole gallery and everything. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, it was on 3rd Avenue between 84th and 83rd or 85th and 84th. I'm not sure.
That's fun.
Those are cool old photos.
And Anne, you said you weren't, into comics until you got to Marvel. Like, what was your perspective life on how the relationship between comic book shops?
If you're, I was raised in suburbia so in the 70s, suburbia, there were definitely no comic book shops and maybe spinner racks here and there. But not being a city kid, an urban kid, you really were kind of oblivious to the world of comics. We were still just getting them, in the front pages. So I would read I loved Pogo, I loved Dick Tracy, Crazy Cat. There were comics that I loved, but they were more strips that you'd get in the paper. And so then I was kind of oblivious to comics until going to college, when there was in New Paltz, which is upstate New York, a university where there was an underground comic scene. And that's when I first stumbled on Robert Crumb and people like that. And I was like, wait a minute, these things, comics can be really personal. You can really turn your brain inside out and put it on a page, And I started drawing, and I was a painter and wanted to be an artist. And so that was back then. And now it's, if I pass a comic book shop, I'll go in and I'll ask the people working there, what are you reading? Like, what's good these days? And they'll steer me to stuff. So I think that it's like there's so much stuff being published. It's difficult to find the good stuff. If you're like me, you don't want to spend all that much time online. It's easier to just go in a comic shop, support the comic shop, buy comics there, and interact with the staff. And then suddenly someone in the store will pipe up and say, have you heard about this? Are you reading this? And then you come home with an armload of comics.
I'm going to take a page from that. I'm doing a signing this weekend here in New Orleans, and I'm going to ask the people who come to the table, what are you reading? Because it may be something I'm completely unaware of. I lean towards superhero comics because it's what I know, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy a lot of other material that's out there, and I would like some direction on that. That's a great idea.
I love that. Actually, I'll piggyback off of that as well, because I at least, my first job was in a comic book shop. And I always remember in a weird way, and this goes back to the whole theme of the more things change, the more things stay the same, is as comic book shops, you are also the curator. You're not just a distributor. You are the curator for your audience as to what we should be spending our time on. And so I feel like the community being there's this whole self-curating process that does happen when we're all chit-chatting about what we're all reading. And I still remember, my boss used to have me do a weekly top 10 poll, and I would be the one selecting. I'll read all the books, and I'll select what's the top 10 reads. And I felt like having that top 10 reads on a localized level, we were essentially like the Wizards magazine for our local consumers. So California Comics, I would say being a curator and being responsible for the reading taste and being a good recommender, not influenced by marketing, but truly promoting the stories, I think is a powerful and a good reason as to why people would come back to visit you guys.
Yeah. Wait, Carl, I feel an obligation to get an unhinged story
Let's
in.
go. Let's go. What else? What else?
I know you are calling it unhinged so far.
We are. We
Yeah.
are.
Unhinged.
So this is something I mentioned to Anne the other day on a phone call, and she wasn't aware of how it extended once she left staff. So I'm going to tell this unhinged story.
Right.
So Anne was, when I started working for Anne in her office, we were doing Comet Man, which was written by Miguel Ferrar and Bill Mooney at the time. And the penciler was Kelly Jones. And I'm sure all of you are aware, he has a very stylized approach to anatomy. It's beautiful work. And I love
great.
Kelly's work.
I think you did a Venom with him or something.
Did you?
Really? Yeah, he's really good.
Oh, I know. It's amazing. And that, you had Sienkiewicz ink that cover that's showing there. Probably all the covers. Maybe you did them. But so Anne had hired an inker, a new inker who had no real experience. We'll call him Greg because that was his name. He took the pages. So all the work was done on artboards then. It wasn't digital, obviously. He took the pages home. He brought in the first few 3 or 4 pages, and he had erased all of Kelly's stylized anatomy and corrected it.
Wow.
And fired him on the spot for doing that. And luckily, I had Xeroxed everything. The procedure usually was you Xeroxed them full size and you Xeroxed them book size. So I had Xeroxed everything. We were able to work from that. But Anne told him to bring in the rest of the artwork the next day. He didn't show up. A couple of days, Anne called him and said, what's going on? Where's the artwork? And he said, what are you talking about? I met with Terry in some shadowed bar last night and gave him the pages. And Anne asked me if that was true. And I said, no. And so not only was he fired at that point, he was banned from coming on the Marvel premises anymore because he had basically stolen that artwork. I don't know if it's because he had already erased half of it. I don't know. So cut to 5 years later, Anne is off staff. I'm a full editor. I get a call from Greg asking, saying, I can't get back in the door unless I can get past you. Is it possible? You give me a chance again. And I thought, hey, he was a young guy. Everybody deserves a second chance. I made plenty of mistakes in my life. So I was the editor of Marvel Comics Presents at the time, and I gave him a story, I think to ink. I think someone else had penciled it, but I don't really remember. And it was a story about the Wizard, an old World War II superhero whose wife was bludgeoned to death by an archenemy of his.
Wow.
I gave him the story. I told him, he had 2 weeks to do it. It was 8 pages. He came in about 2 weeks later with that, wheeling his baby in a baby stroller to say he needed a little more time because his wife had left him for another woman and he was dealing with that. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine, sure. It's not scheduled, this story. You go ahead, take another 2 weeks. Cut to a couple of days later, a very, very well-recognized artist in the industry who I will not name, I had hired to do an 8-part Wolverine serial for Marvel Comics Presents that Peter David was writing. And he came in, he didn't live in New York, but he showed up at the office and he talked to me very seriously. He said, I'm sorry, I'd never do this. He's a very professional guy, but I'm going to have to back out of this project. It's personal. What's going on? So that's fine. Replaced him with Sam Keith. There's whole other stories there. But later that afternoon, I answer the phone and it's the police saying they're looking for Terry Kavanagh. And my misspent youth came rushing back at me a little bit. And I said, let me see if I can find him. And then I walked away from the phone and I rustled some papers. And then I came back and I had to speak in a completely different voice for the rest of the conversation. My assistant, Mike Rockwitz, is just staring at me. He has no idea who's on the other end of the line. And they asked me to come down to the police station because Greg had murdered his wife, bludgeoned her to death. And that's literally what the story was about. So they wanted to know, and there was blood all over the pages, wanted to know if I thought that the story had inspired the murder. And I said, I have absolutely no idea. I'm not really the murderous type, so I don't really know where murder comes from. But when I went down to the police station to talk to them, there was that very highly recognized artist who had come to me earlier that day to say that he wasn't going to be able to take on the project because of something personal. And it turns out that he was friends with Greg, and Greg, after a week of, well, the wife her body was in his bathtub for a while. A bunch of, Joe Rubenstein, a bunch of other inkers had done an inker jam at Greg's place during the week, and Greg had told them, you can't use my bathroom, it's under renovation, you have to go use the bathroom in the deli downstairs or whatever. And it's because she was in there apparently for the week. And he finally called and confessed to his buddy who lived out of town, the other artist. That artist came in, convinced him to confess and tell them where her body was, because at that point he had moved her to some dumpster somewhere. So that's my unhinged story.
A comic book murder.
Yes.
Wow.
3 years later, Klaus Janson ran into Greg on the street. He was out in 3 years.
What?
Yep.
Wow.
Crime of passion.
I don't remember that guy, and I don't remember firing him or whatever. But the other day I posted, you remember the Twilight Zone? Bill Mummy was in an episode called
Famous
It's a
one.
Real Life. And he's like, so I posted a picture, of like, because everybody's talking about Trump's first 100 days. So I wrote, I put the picture of Bill Mummy as a kid ordering everyone into a cornfield.
Yes.
Yep. and I was like, the first 100 days, just to see if anyone would get the reference. And who pops up but Elliot Brown, who says, who not only got the reference, but he's now friends with Bill Mummy, I guess, via social media. And he said that Bill Mummy himself has noticed that the similarities of that episode.
Wow.
It's almost like the Twilight Zone is now in the Oval Office in the White House.
Yeah. Somehow we manifested it.
Like the kid just start, you go to the cornfield,
Yep.
Everyone should Google.
I'm surprised that didn't. I'm surprised that your story, Terry, didn't cause a moral panic. Like, imagine if that was picked up.
Yes.
Comics writer,
I'm
life
sort of
imitates
surprised
art.
too. That could have been something that would have been a whole new comic book scandal, and how we're influencing children and artists badly. It totally could have been that. And there was some backstory to her. It turned out that she had married him under a fake identity of her old college roommate, who was mysteriously missing.
Well, what are you saying, Terry? She deserved it?
No, not at all. She was a lovely person. She's the one who came and picked up the plot from me originally to take to him, because she worked like a block away. But now I'm going to drop that part of the story when I tell it in the future.
No.
That's crazy, because if things like that happen today, it'd be all over social media. But as you're talking about it, I'm Google searching. I just can't find it. So the guy leaving in 3 years, I mean, all the records are probably gone by now.
Yeah.
And so it's just crazy how what people got away with back then.
Yeah. When Klaus ran into him 3 years later, he was a bike messenger.
Yeah.
He put the kibosh on his career twice. First, he did it with Anne by erasing all the Kelly Jones stuff. And then, he did it with the whole murdering his wife thing.
It's weird. It gets back to why it would be fun to do some kind of book that collected all the 80s Marvel bullpen stories, because it's like, Rashomon, one event, 5 views on the event. Like that is literally what memory is. At a certain point, your memory is your warped vision of something, and everyone else in the room has a different angle on it. I do not remember that whole story Terry told. I don't remember him erasing the pages or me firing him or any of that.
That's a great idea, actually.
I love your idea of doing those sort of bullpen stories as a comic book. I know that Tom DeFalco and Fabian, I think, and maybe even Steve Saffel have been talking about doing a book about that time period, because really it was unmatched in any creative field, to my knowledge, that we were all just having the time of our lives. And that led to creating some great stuff, some crap as well, but some great stuff, because we were just all in on what we were doing and loving each other. And I just can't even imagine there's ever been a work environment like that. So they've been talking about doing that as a prose book, but I like your idea of
drawing
it as a comic book.
A simple comic, because like I have some memory that I don't know if it's real or not of, didn't we have a helium tank in the office and they were blowing up balloons? And so everybody was taking hits off the helium tank, but also the cleverest thing, and it's funny, I don't know if Dean Haspiel is still in here, but I was going to put it in my little New York story of getting my job at Marvel, but I was like, am I making this up or is it real? I have a memory of people writing words on balloons and tying them to their heads so that you literally had a word balloon over your head. You know,
what a freaking blast, dude! Like, so much substance is what made things so fun in the offices.
You know what, Ann? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if that was real or not. It's a great story.
Real.
That's a great story.
I have a memory, and I've either conflated a bunch of things together, but it was still, it could have happened.
Sure, absolutely.
So I'm gonna dive into some of the other questions from our audience. Interested to know, Anne, if you could do it all over again, would you do anything different?
I think that your skill level goes up. I mean, I think that, you know, my first comics, I really enjoyed killing Spider-Woman because you know, because I was like being mentored by Mark Grunwald. So he had mapped out the issues in terms of, like, he came up with the villains, and the arc was literally that the Spider-Woman book had no sales anymore, and there was a point at which if a book went under 20,000 copies, I think, sold, which is high for these days, but back then,
honestly, Ann, I think it was under 100,000 we were canceling at one point.
Yeah, maybe I forget what it was, but it was like Spider-Woman had dipped below the profitability margin, so they had to kill off the book. And Mark thought, well, why don't we just kill her? And so we killed her. And we had to have a semi-happy ending in that she went to the astral plane and, you know, Doc Strange, and she walked off happy. But I got so many letters they weren't like today's hate letters from trolls. They were people that were sad and crying because she was gone. And so that was sort of my first lesson, learning how, like, attached you can become to a character and how you shouldn't really kill them, you know. And then I think that because Arthur Adams, I think, suffered a lot because my first real comic being Long Shot, I didn't know what I was doing yet. And
I love Long Shot.
I was giving Arthur like newbie errors, like you never put two actions in one panel. You know, I was giving him like plots where he'd have to draw like 16 panels a page. And I look back at that and I was like, there was enough junk in that comic for like years of stories that we crammed into, you know, 6 issues, and poor Arthur had to draw it all, you know.
So what was your original vision of Mojo? Because I've read the story that you had just given a description to Art about how he's spineless, but he actually drew him as spineless. So what was your original vision? Like, because that was unexpected.
Arthur and I shared a love of monsters, you know, and so I think that what happened, like, Arthur still has those plots. I threw them very quickly in the garbage because they were such a mess. And in fact, I always tell Arthur, like, could you please throw those away? They're embarrassing. But I'm pretty sure that when we were talking about the Mojo world and the demons that were going to be coming, like there was this Magog and Magog, Arthur just the fax machine, which was just filling, or maybe he sent them by mail, with all these monsters to choose from. Wow. And so he came up with the whole design for Mojo. And there was a woman that he sent, the 6-armed woman spiral, like that was all Arthur. Wow. The idea that in the corner boxes, the little monster would grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until he overwhelmed. So it's like the artist often comes up with a lot of stuff that goes right into the comic. And so in terms of if I could do it all over, I think I would have like figured it out faster that you shouldn't give an artist so much to draw, because it really detracts from a good read. You want to like, and I was also at the time obsessed with fans getting their money's worth. I was like, wait, this story is slight. There's not enough meat in it. You know, I want them to get their money's worth, you know? So
they're definitely not obsessed about that today. I'll tell you that at the big two.
Overfill it with too much stuff because I wanted them. So if you look at my early work, it's packed with way too much stuff.
Well, when you think about it, we were learning out there live in front of everyone else. We were learning what we did, both editing and writing. I always felt it was odd that at some point when Two left staff and I got promoted, that I was editing Chris Claremont. I had never written a word in my life, and it just seemed weirdly ballsy to be saying, oh, I can help shape your story when you're a professional writer, and you have been for 10 years at this point, and I know nothing except what I sort of learned as an apprentice. I always almost felt that was ass backwards. Like, you should be a writer before you're an editor. But we learned on the go in front of hundreds of thousands of readers.
Hundreds of thousands, we dropped our pants in public all the time. But you know, I think that what makes sense is fresh eyes. So, you know, the reason editors are so valuable, and like I've done 2 graphic novels now with Karen Berger, and we're hopefully going to do another one. And it's really the fresh eyes, like when things don't make sense, or you know, with Chris had a billion ideas.
Always
about a billion ideas, and you know, you'd make diagrams. And, okay, here's all the characters spread over all the books. And a lot of your job with Chris was just to listen. And if you, as someone hearing his story, got excited by the story, because he had too many ideas.
He did.
Working with him was a joy because there were way too many ideas. And so you just had to resonate. You resonate with this one. That's a great one. You know, when he pitched doing some stories with, I had done a Daredevil with Barry Windsor Smith, and we wanted him to do some, while I was an editor, I guess, because we wanted him to do some X-Men. And when Chris pitched 2 stories, one of them was, with Barry, we can do something a little different, and he pitched the Stormforge romance issues, which were wonderful. Life Death. And then he also pitched this great idea: what if Wolverine didn't know he was Logan and he was more feral, and it was so he's with this little girl, I think it was one of Wheezy's Power Pack kids. And it was like such a great issue because the tension the whole time was literally like Frankenstein at the well with a little girl. Is Wolverine going to push the little girl down the well at some point? You know, so you listen to ideas, and if you respond as it's just in a very human way, that's a great story. Then, you know, so that's what editors are good for, and they're good for, you know, the phrase "kill all your darlings," which is writers can get attached to something that a reader goes, you know, that really just slowed the story down. Yeah. So Kill All Your Darlings is, and it happens in film all the time too. I used to have a film magazine called Scenario, and I'd interview great directors and great screenwriters on what changed from their original script to their finished film. And a lot of it had to do with killing your darlings. Like, really, this scene is awesome, but it slows the movie down. It's got to go.
You know, one of the pieces of advice Tom DeFalco used to give was write your story and then throw away the first 10 pages.
Yeah, because that often you're doing too much setup.
Yep. You know? And you don't need to. And back to with Chris did have so many ideas that our job as editor with Chris was always to pare it down and to focus him, because he would have put every single thing in there. All the time. And I always felt like, okay, Chris, this is our story. That's a great scene you're talking about. It just doesn't serve this story. Let's put that aside and use that somewhere else. But let's focus on the story we're telling here. And I would ask Chris directly. I would often say, Chris, give me an elevator pitch. Give me a 2-sentence description of this story. And then any of the ideas he had that didn't serve that, I would say, let's put that aside for now.
You know, and I kind of remember one time, I'm going to get this all wrong and Chris can correct me. But because we had so many, we had the books and the miniseries, I think we sent to hell, and then we forgot she was in hell or something. We put her in a crystal in some demon zone. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like one day we were like plotting and we're like, well, what about Eliana? And then we're like, wait a minute, I think we left her somewhere in some plot thread that we never picked up before. That it might not have been Eliana, but it was something like that.
I think it was.
Yeah, and then we had to like say, oh shit, we got to bring her back.
All right, so to piggyback off of kind of kill your darlings, California Comics had a question for both of you. Who are your favorite superheroes of all time, and I'll ask why.
Mine's Batman, because you could grow up to be Batman. All you needed was $1 billion. I didn't think getting bitten by a radioactive spider would really be good for me. And it was too late for me to be born on another planet that exploded. But I could be Batman if I just really put the work in. And even as a kid, I would ride my bike to all the local gas stations and get the free maps they had. And I would try to memorize, like at Queens Village, where I grew up, like every alleyway, etc., in Queens Village, in case I ever had to chase my version of the Riddler through there. I wanted to be one step ahead.
I think for me, I don't know if this is a chicken or egg question, but I think it would have to be Daredevil because I lived in New York. I could go right over to Hell's Kitchen. It was the dream situation because I had a great editor in Ralph Macchio. Ralph was a really great editor.
Yeah.
He knew how to get out of the team's way, put two people together, let them get out, and only step in when he thought you were doing something that, wasn't working and reel you back in. But he really let us go nuts. Then John Romita Jr., he would come into the city all the time because his mom and dad worked on staff, and
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so Virginia Romita kept all the books on time.
She was our den mother.
She was, and that goes back to my first day on the job when I was being interviewed by Shooter, and you could smoke in the office. And Virginia, when I was leaving, because it was me and Virginia shared an office right out of Jim's door.
Oh.
And Virginia looked at me and she goes, "You seem like you'd be great, but I have a question." I said, "What?" And she goes, "You don't smoke, do you?" And I lied. And I said, "No, I don't smoke." I had a pack of Marlboros in my back pocket. And I walked out and I went, I just lied to that nice lady. I got to flip that. I quit smoking for Virginia.
Really?
Because I was... because I just was like, I can't tell a lie to this nice lady.
Wow.
That's so cool.
But to get back to so John Romita Jr. would come into the office and say, "I just saw this guy standing on the roof of a car, I guess somewhere in New York, and he had these pants and this and this." And I think Johnny even said, "I think I want to call him Shotgun." He goes right into the comic, so. Johnny was pulling things off the street. And Daredevil also, because, and I've said this before, he is an endless story generator. You want an endless story generator, a guy who is slaps Catholic wearing the devil's suit. If he can't fix something through the law courts, he uses his fists. He's got like, he's blind justice. He's got, I mean, you can tell Daredevil stories forever because he's got 3 or even 4 major inherent conflicts going on in his head. And he's why I think he's one of the greatest Marvel characters ever.
I would agree. Of Marvel characters, my 2 favorites were Daredevil and Moon Knight.
Oh yeah, Moon Knight. Moon Knight's another terrific one because he's got the multiple personas. So
exactly,
these characters are endless story generators. That means you can just like, and then especially in the case of Daredevil, writer artist team after writer artist team. That like for how many decades there hasn't been a misbeat. The stories are always, the themes are always good.
Some of the most iconic Marvel storylines are Daredevil storylines.
Yeah. And you can tell from the TV show, I didn't see the second one yet, but the first TV show, Daredevil TV show, it's so good. It's so respectful of the characters. And because we often go on the con circuit and see Charlie Cox and Vince D'Onofrio, they know who we are.
Yeah.
They've read our stories. They know exactly who we are. And that's like, these are deeply respectful actors who bring the whole history to the show. And, you know, you see that, I guess, in Robert Downey Jr., the way he inhabited not only the arrogance and richness of Iron Man, but Danny O'Neill's stories about, you know, the alcoholism of Iron Man, of Tony Stark. That is when an actor picks up on the best of the comic history and brings it to the character. It's a real joy. You can tell.
You know, if I remember correctly about Robert Downey Jr., when they first started talking about casting him, the studios said, no, the guy wakes up in other people's houses drunk. You know, he's not a good role model for children. And if I remember correctly, Ralph and Mark Grunwald flew out there to talk to them to say, look, if you're making this movie for children, you're missing a bet. Yeah. Children aren't, you know, you got to make this for the adults and they will take their children.
Yeah.
You know, and this guy, if you don't cast Tony Stark correctly, the suit of armor is just a hollow shell. It won't matter at all. And they could not have picked, in the end, a better actor to play Tony Stark than him. He brought the flawed elements to it and the likable elements at the same time, probably because of his true life story. Exactly what they were concerned about is what he brought to life on the screen.
Story. I mean, and Denny O'Neill's life story. I mean, Denny, you know, was a dear friend, and you know, he and I used to share because we were sort of like, we want to be journalists. We both had done a bunch of journalism. So Denny's the one who said, put your life in the comic. That's what, you know, Denny's big advice was like, just make it real.
Yeah, in fact, speaking of Robert Downey Jr., Stan is asking, he was originally cast as Iron Man, and now he's getting a crack at Dr. Doom on the big screen. Would the panel know how the decision process is made?
No, that's way above our pay grade.
Yeah, no idea.
We know nothing about that. I mean, there was an article written recently that made me kind of sad, which was that it was the showrunners of Daredevil saying that, you know, back when it was a Netflix show, they had planned for one of my characters, Typhoid Mary. She started in Iron Fist, and then she was supposed to move to all the other shows and eventually end up ripping the heart out of Daredevil. And I was like, dang, I would have liked to seen that. But
yeah, and what a visual character. What a great, she was a great character.
And I liked how Alice Neal, I think her name was, to Alice Eve.
I'm not sure.
Alice Eve, I think the actress that played her in the Iron Fist show. That you got to just see the beginnings of what they had planned to go through all the books.
Okay, and then another question. We're speaking about favorite characters was Daredevil and Moon Knight. Terry, how did Stephen Platt end up on the final issue of Moon Knight? What was that process and experience like seeing those issues become a massive hit as the series was being canceled? I don't know if Ann, you were there as well, but Terry, this question's for
I
you.
don't remember the
Ann
movie.
was off staff by then.
Yeah.
Steven's going to be on an episode of Unhinged upcoming, so I'll just briefly touch on this and then I'll let him tell his story. He had shown up. He's Canadian. He had shown up. He was relatively young. I think he was maybe first year of college or second year of college, and it might have been an art college. He showed up to hopefully show some samples, but had no idea how to get in the door. He was online at the bank, and one of the people, Robbie Carosella, remember Robbie, and who was in the stat room, was wearing a Marvel jacket. So Steven approached him. Robbie was there as well. Steven approached him and showed him some of his stuff. Robbie said, show up at 1:30 this afternoon. I'll get you in the door. Well, almost all new talent was brought to me first because of Marvel Comics Presents. I could do these experimental 8-page stories. I could try someone out without a schedule. He brought his stuff to me. I immediately hired him on the spot to do an 8-page Moon Knight story. And then when I was writing Moon Knight at the time for Joey Cavallari, he was the editor. When they needed a new artist, I brought the pages that Steven had done for me for the Marvel Comics Presents story, and then they hired him. That's sort of the brief version of it.
You know, speaking of Marvel Comics Present, were you the editor who let me put a trans character in a Marvel comic?
Of course.
Oh, yeah. So that's a funny story because, so, you know, I had trans friends and I just put a trans character in a Marvel comic. And then
What year was this? What year was this?
92, maybe 93. Something like that.
And sounds right.
It was some crazy thing that started with Fred Harper and ended with Steve Lytle, or maybe it was the other way around. Steve Lytle, who sadly passed from COVID. That it was like Wolverine, Typhoid Mary, Ghost Rider. It was like a whole mess of people. And so I had this trans character, and I made her. She was presenting as female, and she was born male, presented as female, who was an empath, because, you know, I find that trans people are very empathic, and because they understand like the other and the outsider and all that stuff. And so Typhoid Mary actually gets really angry when she finds out that the girl is actually a boy, and they have a fight and then they make up. But then 30 years later, it becomes like a big deal where there are all these stories like, why hasn't Marvel had a trans character since 1992? You know?
Yeah.
But you as an editor, you didn't think it was any big deal.
If it was a good story, it's not gonna. If it offends some people, they deserve to be offended.
Yeah,
that's fine. And we in comic books should have been doing experimental stuff. We should have been ahead of the curve. We really should have. The way the clone story sort of developed in Spider-Man was the issue of Time magazine with Dolly the clone came out and on the cover. And I remember thinking, now this is real science. Why aren't we should be in comic books 50 years ahead of real science?
There were other iconic, when I was working on the Marvel Universe of Superheroes traveling exhibition, you know, they become seminal moments in a history museum of Marvel Comics, like the first, I think it was Misty Knight. What was the
Misty Knight.
It was like the first black and white kiss, first interracial kiss on a Marvel cover or splash page or something. And then people look back and they're like, they think that was a big deal, but it was very natural to the landscape of the times to put these things into comics.
Well, and you remember there's a famous story about Star Trek where there was going to be a black and white kiss, and the producer said, absolutely not, make her green. And then it was fine.
Wow, that's crazy times.
Green and white kiss was
Very-
fine.
Very end of my run of Daredevil, I gave Daredevil a kind of a black activist girlfriend.
Mm.
And, that was, I think I had taken his memory away and he became a fighter, a boxer like his dad. And he started like living rough, like living on the street. And he met this black activist girl with like a mohawk or something. And I have a feeling that I never had anyone confront me directly about that going too far, but there was a weird feeling that nobody really wanted Daredevil to have a black girlfriend, and that
That's
was
interesting.
like shocking to
Yeah.
me.
You know what's weird? It's when I hear your stories on that, like I don't. It's not weird. I think it actually made sense. It was like story sense, right? It was very organic in
Right.
how he met this woman. But I feel
And-
like now they just pull it up for gimmick's sake, right? And I feel like
sake,
that's why it doesn't work. That's why people get turned off. Is because it's not put in the right.
And that's
So
so
content.
disrespectful to the people who are living a life like that, where it's every day for them. To pull it out and use it as a gimmick is just abominable.
Yeah.
All right. With that said, we're a little bit over time. I appreciate all the time you spent and with us. This is awesome because the show is supposed to be an hour. We went almost 90 minutes.
Oh.
And Stan said it all here. He said, "Holy moly, the behind-the-scenes stories are better than the comics. We need a tell-all book ASAP, Terry." So this may be a 24/7 comics title. Thanks everyone who's in the chat today. Fans of Evermind, fans of 24/7 comics, fans of Ann, fans of Terry, Swaggle Hoss as well. It's been amazing. So with that said, anything you guys need to promote? I mean, Ann would love to kind of just talk about your website a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have a website. I have half my friends call me Annie and half call me Ann. It's like people have made jokes that it's like the lamest pseudonym ever. But yeah, there's my film magazine, and I have managed to archive them. So if you click on the issue, you can read these amazing interviews as directors discuss what changed from script to screen. And I have some of links to the films that I've made on there, and some comics that I like. Haiti, I taught film in Haiti, and I wrote a series about making films in Haiti, making films in Baluchistan.
Wow.
So you can read all this stuff. Hilo Brow, which is an amazing website. I did a lot of stuff for Stop Smiling, and then here's my own comics I like. We all have we're very aware which of our comics were stinkers and which were good, So, I put some. There's the Marvel Street Art Museum that we did before moving on to the Marvel Universe of Superheroes. It's the same company.
Wow. You've been in many places and have blessed many places with your talent. So guys, this is a whole deep dive in itself here. So definitely visit Ann's website. How about for you, Terry? I know we have something really special coming out, and you're going to be at a Free Comic Book Shop Day this weekend as well.
Yes, over the next, I think, 3 weekends here in New Orleans, I'll be doing signings to promote Heroes Be Damned. And we have ash cans that we'll be giving out. It's a great project. It's how Carl and I first started working together. It's just brilliant. Vince Sinico, I keep doing that wrong, is the writer and artist on it. And when I first got on the project, that was a little concerning to me because sometimes writer-artists can you neglect one discipline for the other or hope they can make up for it in the other. This guy is so professional. It's such an interesting story. I don't want to give too much away. There's a mystery element to it. It's superheroes. There's a horror, demonic element to it as well. So there's that.
Yep. So this will have ash cans with you at the Free Comic Book Day, and we have a bunch of signings happening across America and Canada with 24/7 comics creators. And so wherever 24/7 comics creators are, there's going to be Heroes Be Damned limited edition ash cans as well. So with that said, Anne, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for making
A
time.
lot of fun.
I think
And it's
I
May
think
Day, so I have to walk over to a protest after this.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, May
Oh.
Day. It's lawyer protest right now, and then Labor
Oh my
Union
gosh.
protest right down the block here.
Mm.
That's why you probably heard. Maybe you couldn't hear, but there are helicopters whirling all above.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
it's May Day.
well, be safe, and
yeah.
please stay on. We gotta upload your stream before we can let you go, but we'll
Okay.
all say bye to the audience, and then we'll see you guys next time at Terry Kavanagh's Unhinged Stories. Thanks.
Yeah, next weekend it's Wednesday with Howard Mackey.
Howard Mackey. Yeah.